I live in hope over this case because it's such an appalling case. He's on trumped-up charges. He should never have been arrested, let alone incarcerated for the 16 years that he's been there. It's astonishing, really, that any British government, and I have to tell you on both sides of the fence, would avoid raising this because, after all, what's the point of citizenship if your government doesn't defend you?
So, Iain Duncan Smith, Conservative MP for Chingford and Woodford Green, thank you so much for joining Times Radio today.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
You and I are here to discuss a pretty bizarre and insane case. 17 years ago, UK citizen Ryan Cornelius was arrested in 2008 in Dubai on fraud charges, specifically for obtaining a loan from the Dubai Islamic Bank on one of his property developments. So before he was arrested, he had already agreed to pay back this loan of $500 million as the GFC had just hit. He was still arrested and then slapped with a $500 million fine. He was kept in jail, accused of not paying back the fine, despite the fact that the bank had seized control of his assets worth well over $1 billion, which are now worth well over $3 billion. 17 years later, he remains in a Dubai prison on pent-up charges, having not seen his family since. So, Iain, you've been working, using your influence, using your power to kind of keep this real-life nightmare in the headlines. So what did you think when you first heard about this case?
Well, I was shocked. It was completely a fraudulent a case. I understand it that one of the ruling family became the chairman or head of the board, Dubai Bank, and that's when all the difficulties started. He had assets that were more than capable of covering the loan, but the loan was called in when this particular individual arrived, and they were valued at face value, which I think the loan was half a billion, but they said it wasn't worth anything. So they seized it, and he was arrested and put into jail. Since then they've changed the law again, I think twice now, to make sure that he doesn't get out. And so that's where he sits, languishing. Now, the real problem behind this story was he's a British citizen. He's arrested in a prison. He sits in UAE, but in Dubai. And I just was astonished the fact that hardly any foreign secretary ever raises the case with the UAE at all, let alone Dubai directly. And this had gone on for ages. It wasn't until I got hold of David Cameron, when Lord Cameron became foreign secretary for the last bit of the last government, that I sat down with him and explained the case. And he said he would do something about it. And he actually, for the first time, raised the case with the authorities when he was over there for a meeting. Now, as you know, the UK has been hoping to get UAE investment in the nuclear industry and various other bits and pieces. So the reason why the Foreign Office was not keen to raise it, because they, as ever, thought it would get in the way of good relations.
Is
But he's
that
a
is
British.
that your interpretation? That
Yeah,
it's
I don't. I'll be honest with you. The Foreign Office, I think, when it comes to individuals, are not particularly good because they think that they get in the way of wider relationships. You've seen this in. We couldn't get Jimmy Lai to be properly raised by the British government. They were going back a long way when he was arrested on trumped-up charges again, and it took us arguing endlessly. They kept on using China's interpretation of his status, and they kept calling him a dual national, but he wasn't a dual national. He's never had another passport, but the British government kept on using this ridiculous terminology so they didn't have rights of access. Until eventually we managed to, again with David Cameron, get him to accept that he was not a dual national, and he then raised it with the Chinese government. So we sort of made a start. Then we discovered the present government when the first Foreign Secretary, who was now moved over to Justice Secretary, he went out there and we discovered that he never even raised it the first time he went out to the UAE. So what we've had here is a sort of peculiarity of the British institutions that are reluctant to raise his case in any shape or form. Yet the UN, as you know, have now said this is essentially an illegal arrest and imprisonment. And most of the Europeans have much said the same as far as I can make out. The UK was the slowest to get onto this one, which is astonishing. So the family came to see me, and I've spoken to them about it, and I just said, look, we just got to get on and bully people. So the last thing we've done is written a letter with 140, something like
146.
140 Yeah, sorry, you're ahead of me on this one. Signatures, all our parliamentarians, which we've organised. That was handed in to the UAE about a week and a bit ago, and we haven't heard anything back, but we are aiming at the 2nd of December, which is the key date, which they're supposed to be responding to us as whether they'll show some amnesty.
And just for the audience, the December 2nd is the UAE's
Yeah,
national
yeah.
day, so pardons are sometimes issued on this day. So how hopeful are you, Iain, that this will be the day that, Ryan is officially released, that the Foreign Office will push for this at the very least?
I live in hope over this case because it's such an appalling case. He's on trumped up charges. He should never have been arrested, let alone incarcerated for the 16 years that he's been there. It's astonishing, really, that any British government, and I have to tell you on both sides of the fence, would avoid raising this because, after all, what's the point of citizenship if your government doesn't defend you? We shouldn't be taking any money from any of these governments if they arrest our people for no reason. And I would apply the same to the UAE. Until this man is arrested, we should say you can stick your money where the sun don't shine, and we're not going to get involved with you. So absolutely. So we're just going to go on and on at this one, and I'm trying to get more and more MPs, and we are. Tim Rocker, who's the MP, Labour MP for his area, is involved in it. But lots of more and more of my colleagues are getting involved. More of the Lords are getting involved. I mean, it's taken a while to get everyone focused on this one, but it's a shocker. And worse than anything else, and we've got as I said, in Beijing, not Beijing, in Hong Kong, we've got Jimmy Lai waiting some ghastly sentence, which they're not very well and sick and has been abandoned. And the same goes for a non-political case, but clearly a corrupt case of finance.
Well, Iain, when British citizens, when they're held hostage, when they're imprisoned, it could be a journalist, it could be a spy, it could be a citizen that was in the wrong place at the wrong time. The government works to get them out, or the very least you'd hope them to support the family. So why would this be different? Is the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office failing?
Because I think governments are failing. And what's going on, doesn't matter who they are. Let's take the China one to begin with. When it comes to Jimmy Lai, he became a pawn in both governments' determination to have better relations with China and possible trade arrangements. And so what's happened is endless government ministers have gone out there, originally wouldn't raise his case. The same is going with Ryan Cornelius. Ryan Cornelius, as I said earlier on, there's money involved here. They desperately want investment into some of our infrastructure by various financiers and the government itself in UAE. But the reality, that means not raising anything that troubles them. So they don't want to do this. The second thing is they think that if they raise it, it just creates a storm and no reason at all. And then they get cut out of any other arrangements at all with these organisations. So I just think it's pathetic, frankly, that a British government does not stand up for a British citizen. They know full well. I mean, even after the UN has claimed this is a wrongful arrest and wrongful conviction, and even then, we don't give it the pressure that we need to say, let them go. Why aren't we working with other countries to demand that they go? There's an American in prison there as well, and I understand that is being, should be raised, and I want to bring all those cases together. I see that the MEP Sean Kelly has sent a letter to the UAE ruler for another individual. So, it goes on like this. If we go on letting these countries behave out with the judicial process, then we shouldn't be doing business with them. I'm sorry, I'm accused of being naive, but I think that business follows good relations. And if those good relations are built on a deceit that you will never raise an issue that causes the totalitarian state that you're dealing with to be upset, then frankly, so be it. We just have to raise them and say, if you want access into our markets and elsewhere, you better behave like a responsible government. As I said, if you don't, well, then all your deals can be put somewhere secret.
Well, you mentioned the UN, Iain. In April 2022, the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention ruled that Ryan had been held in conditions equating to torture, that his guilt was predetermined, he did not receive a fair trial, Dubai had violated a fundamental principle of international law, and while Ryan was in prison, he was urging the Foreign Office to protect him as prison officials were trying to force him into signing a document claiming that his human rights were being upheld. So his human rights were not being upheld. And, you know, you were at the Magnitsky Awards last week. You would obviously know that a way in which you can really get the attention of a government is by placing sanctions on a country that is not upholding the law. And so I wonder, is this kind of the way in which you think we should go forward as a UK government?
Yeah, we've just got to start applying the pressure like mad. As I say, I said 16, it's actually 17 and a half years that he's been there. And the other bit about this, I mentioned the change in the law. You know, when he had done his 10-year sentence, what's most interesting about this, without any legal process, he was informed that there was a thing called Law 37, which allows them retroactively to increase his sentence. So it was extended by a further 20 years. That's what he's facing now, a total of 20 extra years was what happened, and he's now serving those years in imprisonment. You ask, what was the reason for all of this? And the answer is because it suited the heads of the bank that they had now managed to get their hands on a piece of property that they were able, as you said earlier on, valued probably today at around about 3 billion. And they'll be all right. That's sticking in their back pocket somewhere. And we shouldn't be dealing with these people. I just think it's the whole thing. And I was at the Magnitsky Awards, but I'm also chairman of the all-party parliamentary group on Magnitsky sanctions. So we're looking at this all over the world where these appalling cases continue to erupt and where we should be using full individual Magnitsky sanctions on all these people. So I'm questioning the government, why aren't you sanctioning the UAE, individuals in the UAE who are responsible for this in Dubai? I haven't had an answer back yet, but you can bet your bottom dollar we're going to carry on pounding this at the government to say, for God's sake, now say if you don't release him, we will be forced to try and persuade the others, the Americans and others, to put direct individual sanctions on these rulers of these countries because they think they can get away with it. I don't know why we go so weak and wishy-washy when we're dealing with totalitarian states. It's pathetic, really, every time we don't want to upset them. Well, let's try and upset them and see what happens.
Iain, just finally, the Cornelius family, they're broke. Obviously, we know they were wealthy to begin with. Heather is homeless, living with her sister and brother-in-law. Their children have lived most of their lives without their father. I think Heather and Ryan's youngest child, their son Chris, was 8 years old when he was put in jail. So if he gets out, and we hope obviously this December 2nd date, but if he is eventually out, do you think the UK should request some sort of compensation?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I think this is shameful on our part. You know, politicians and government ministers and, of course, the civil service, the Foreign Office. I think we should be ashamed of our behaviour over this. We say that we're, support the rights of British citizens to travel unfettered. It sits in the front of our passport. But we don't do anything about it when these ghastly states turn around and say, sorry, we're going to take the law into our own hands. In fact, we can change the law. So I'm afraid first and foremost, we are at fault because we do not stamp our feet enough and say enough's enough. I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to campaign globally to cut you out of any money that's going, and your money is dirty money. It cannot be used elsewhere until you start behaving like any civilized state should behave. My heart goes out to the family. I really do. I mean, I just can't imagine how awful it must be, as you said, for the children to have grown up without ever seeing their father, and for the rest of the family and his wife and others to just be unable to ever hold out hope that one day he'll be released. And why do foreign secretaries go over there and not mention it? And we luckily managed to get the information out of the consulate, but Lammy didn't mention it when he first went over there after being made foreign secretary. And I said to him, why not? He said, well, I'm mentioning it later. Well, you don't. Why do you have to wait till later?
Well, he also cancelled their meeting after they'd travelled, 2.5 hours to London to meet him.
Yes.
Iain Duncan Smith, thank you so much for joining Times Radio.
My pleasure, Maddie. My pleasure.